Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. I'm Danielle with Dan Fancy Creations, and today we are going to be doing another fun ice cream scoop tumbler. I know I have a few of these different tutorials up on my YouTube, but I love making them. They're so fun, so I figured that I would share kind of all my creations with you guys. And today we are going to be making an ice cream scoop tumbler that is unicorn themed. One of my good friend's little girls is obsessed with unicorns and her birthday is coming up, so I wanted to make her a unicorn scoop tumbler because she really liked the strawberry one that I made her mom. So I'm excited to get started on this one, and hopefully it turns out really cute. I haven't made it yet. So this one I am going to be using Poxy Sculpt, which is what most of my other scoop tumblers are made with. It is such an easy product to use. It's a two-part sculpting epoxy that you mix together, you scoop your scoops out and let it dry, and that is it. There is no sealing involved or anything like that because it is basically an epoxy. It's just in a clay type form versus the liquid that we would use on tumblers. So if you guys are ready to see how my unicorn scoop tumbler turns out, let's get started. So before I start getting on the actual cut part, I'm going to go ahead and make the ears and horn. I am using the Sculpey Primo Porcelain Air Dry, and I'm going to color it with a few dispersion colors from CCDIY. I'm using Tsunami, Flamingo, and Majestic Mauve as my colors. They're going to be more of a pink, purple, and light blue. So I'm going to start by folding this clay into itself and just kind of warm it up a little bit so it's easier to work with. And I divide two little parts, and these are going to be my ears. And I'm really just kind of shaping it how I think a unicorn ear would be. It's pretty simple. It's kind of like a flat teardrop. I know you guys, we've probably all have earrings that kind of look like this shape. It's fairly common. And then I'm going to take another little piece and just kind of dip it in the flamingo dispersion colors, just because I want it a really light pink. I don't need it dark, just a tiny little drop will do. And then I'm basically going to make the same shape, just smaller. And this is going to be for the inner ear that's a little light pink and all the little unicorn cartoon drawings that we see. And then I'm going to flat it out basically and wrap it around my toothpick. And I'm going to use or leave the toothpicks on there because I'm going to use those to insert the ears into the scoops when we make those. And I'm just going to set these aside, and then we'll get started on the horn. And I'm basically going to do the same thing. I'm going to take 3 equal parts, and we're going to color those separately. And just try to get it as even as you can. They don't need to be exact. And we're going to do the same thing as we did before. My clay kind of got stuck in my dispersion color cap, but I just used my toothpick to dig it out. And I just need a little drop of color. And then I'm basically going to roll it out where one end is a little bit larger than the other end, basically the shape of a unicorn horn. And then we're going to do the same thing. We're just going to mix our next color And you can wear gloves if you want to. I should have, because my hands were definitely colored when I got done mixing this, but I just figured why not? We're just going to go ahead and go with it. So we're rolling this piece of clay in the same shape as the first one, and we're just going to lay it next to the pink one. And then we're going to move on to our last color, which is Tsunami. And I just dipped a little bit in there. And y'all can see it just took a tiny little drop just to get the color that I wanted. I didn't want it super dark because I wanted this to be more of a pastel color. And once we get this about the same size, we're going to lay it on top of the other two. And then we're basically just going to twist the clay so that it gets that swirl look that unicorn horns have. And you can do it slowly. It's easier to control if you do it slowly. And then I'm just going to roll it on my table just to kind of squish everything together and make it more of an even shape all the way around instead of the different colors kind of popping out, if that makes sense. And then we will set these aside and let them dry. So while our horn and ears are drying, we are going to go ahead and make our scoops with Poxy Sculpt. If you guys do not have Poxy Sculpt yet, I highly suggest using these for scoops. You'll need an ice cream scoop. I definitely prefer the trigger because it helps get the scoops out of the ice cream scooper. And you definitely want to wear gloves when you are mixing this together. So Poxy Sculpt is basically a two-part sculpting epoxy mix. I always test how much I need by placing a scoop of one part into the ice cream scoop. So I know that that is how much one scoop will be. And then I add about a half of a scoop. So part A is 1.5 scoops, and then part B will be 1.5 scoops. So when I mix it all together and scoop it out, it will produce 3 scoops, which is how many scoops I use for my scoop tumblers. If you use more scoops or less scoops, obviously your measurements will be a little bit different than mine. But once you have them all pretty much even, we are just going to mix it all together really well. It is a two-part epoxy, so you definitely want to make sure that part A and part B are equally mixed. So I typically just take it and fold it into each other. You can see I basically just fold from the edges into the center. So after I have mixed it for a little while and I think that everything is combined really well, then we're going to add our dispersion colors to color the Poxy Sculpt. I am using the same 3 dispersion colors that I used for the horn. That way everything kind of flows nicely together and will look good once it's all done. So I'm just kind of separating them into 3 equal parts right now. And I kind of test it in my little ice cream scooper just to be sure that they're at least all 1 scoop. I kind of decided one was a little bit bigger and I tend to put the bigger one on the bottom. So I wanted the bigger one to be a certain color. So, and once I put the dispersion colors in there. I kind of wanted this one to be more of a swirl color and not just solid purple or solid blue. So you can see that I'm not necessarily folding it into each other. I'm just kind of pulling the Poxy Sculpt kind of like taffy so that I get that marbled look. And I added a little bit more. These are definitely lighter colors, or at least the purple is. So I did add a little bit more just to get some more color in there. And by now you guys can see that my gloves are super messy because it is definitely sticky. That's why you should wear gloves. So once I get my color, I just kind of place my scoop onto my tinfoil and kind of pull the trigger back and forth. Poxy Sculpt can kind of clog your trigger, I guess. It can be a little hard to get out. So I pull in short little spurts, and that helps the Poxy Sculpt kind of release from the scoop itself. So now we're moving on to our next color, which is Tsunami. And again, you guys can see that it's not solid blue. I have a little bit of white marbling throughout. And we're just going to place this one on the side of the first scoop and slowly pull my trigger until it releases. And then we're going to color our last scoop, which is Flamingo. And I did not clean my scoop out each time. I may have gotten a little bit of the color out, but I do like the mixing of the colors, kind of like real ice cream. If you were going from a purple scoop to a blue scoop, you might have a little bit of residue from the previous ice cream on there. So I do like that look for my scoops. So for the third one, we're just going to place it basically in between the first two. And there you have it. So that is just our scoops, if that's what we're going to be doing, but we're going to be adding some other stuff. So I am going to close up my dispersion colors. I take off my gloves because they are super sticky, and I think that they rip during this because they're really small. And I have a few little sprinkles that I have. The pastel sprinkles are from CCDIY. And the other ones are just random ones that I have collected over the years. And I am going to place my horn and my ears, even though they are not dry yet. They have dried a little bit, so at least I can place them into my scoops while my scoops are still wet. I do trim down the horn and the toothpicks a little bit because they were a little bit longer than I wanted them. And this was probably the hardest part, trying to decide where I was going to place this horn. So I kind of made a hole with my toothpick, and I just placed my horn down in there. And then placed the ears on either side of the horn. And I did press them down into the Poxy Sculpt a little bit, just so the Poxy Sculpt could grab on to the clay and help secure it as well. And then it was on to placing all my sprinkles. And I will usually place a sprinkle and press it down into the Poxy Sculpt with a toothpick if I need to. Some of them were like large round balls, so I could just press them into the Poxy Sculpt with my fingers. So this is pretty much it for this step. After you place all your sprinkles, just set it aside for it to dry, and then I will come back and drill my hole for my straw, which is typically about 12 hours. I know some people have said that they make a hole with their straw while the Poxy Sculpt is still wet, but since my scoops are removable, I like to drill the hole later so I can make sure that my straw hole in the actual lid of the tumbler and the scoop are lined up perfectly so it sits on the cup well and it's not angled in some weird way, if that makes sense. So while our scoops are drying, we're going to work on our cup. I sprayed mine white and then with fluorescent pink by Krylon to give it that hot pink base that I like. I am going to use Rust-Oleum 2x clear spray to apply my glitter, which is Prickly Pear Margarita from the Drunk Flamingo. So I'm going to spray this cup outside, which I did out of camera, and then I will come back and just sprinkle on my glitter. This is how I apply probably 90% of my glitter. It really just kind of saves a step because you don't have to wait for epoxy to dry or you're not taking up a turner arm. You can just spray it with clear spray, sprinkle it with glitter, seal it again with clear spray, and you're ready to go. I really like applying glitter this method because, like now, if you miss a spot, you can just spray and then sprinkle your glitter and then your bare spot is gone. So I will spray seal this really well, make sure that glitter is good and sealed in, and then we will move on to our next step, which is epoxying this tumbler. So once the clear spray has dried, I take my epoxy and apply it to my tumbler. Definitely wear a respirator. If you don't have one, I highly suggest getting one. I purchased mine off of Amazon. You just want to make sure that your lungs are protected from these fumes. And when you do the bottom, definitely be sparing with it. You don't want any pools of epoxy on the bottom or around the handles. Just spread it on pretty thin. It will get covered. It's always easier to add more than sand it all off if you added too much. So once my cups have 2 layers of epoxy, I will take them off my turner and sand the top rim and the bottom rim. I typically use my sanding block. I just angle it at the rim and sand all the way around. This will remove 1 to 2 millimeters of epoxy, glitter, paint, all of that stuff so that your rim is extremely smooth. And this will ensure that when you add your next couple layers of epoxy or drips like we're going to do, that everything is sealed in to that stainless cup. And there's no way that liquid or anything like that can seep down in between the glitter and the tumbler. I will also go ahead and sand the entire body of the cup while I'm doing this, just to give the next layer of epoxy, or if we're doing vinyl, we want to make sure that everything is really smooth and that it has a good surface to hold on to. Definitely check your handles too. A lot of times handles seem to have a few rough little edges on them, but you can always sand them smooth. And then with my tumblers, I always just wash them with Dawn dish soap and then dry them with a microfiber towel. I don't use alcohol or anything like that. Just regular dish soap will work well to clean the tumbler thoroughly and get rid of any debris or oil that may be on it. So I will show you guys a close-up of the rim. So you can see that just a slight 1 to 2 millimeter stainless rim all the way around the cup. So now that our cup has been dried off, we are going to add our drips. I am using regular artist resin and Nice and Thick and Mimosa glitter from the Drunk Flamingo. So I am going to mix part A and B very thoroughly. I do not have a time limit on how long I mix. I just mix until there are no striations in the epoxy. You can kind of tell when you're mixing your epoxy, it kind of looks like oil slicks in your epoxy if it still needs to be mixed a little bit longer. And now that it's mixed, I am going to add my glitter. I did have to run out and grab another popsicle stick because I did not want to pour it into my little thimble that I was using. So I mixed a good bit of glitter into my epoxy because I didn't want any transparent parts in my drips. I wanted to be sure that it was basically a solid glitter color all the way through in case there were any thin spots on my drips. And again, I just mixed that really well. And then I started using my Nice and Thick. If you guys have not used Nice and Thick yet, I do suggest that as well. Before, when I would do drips, I would just basically wait 45 minutes or so for my epoxy to thicken so I could add it to my cup. But a lot of times I would forget that I mixed epoxy and I would come back and it would be too thick. And then I would have to basically start the whole process over again. Nice and Thick basically gives you guys the power to make your epoxy as thick as you want to in a matter of 30 minutes or so, maybe even quicker than that. And also, I know it looks like I'm adding a lot of Nice and Thick to this, but a little does go a long way. I guess you could say that it's very much like a powdered sugar texture. So if you put it back in the container or close the container up and shake it to kind of fluff everything back up, it really doesn't even look like you've used a lot of it. I have been using Nice and Thick for months and I have only gone through a couple containers and I do a lot of drip cups. And you guys can also see that the Nice and Thick does change the color slightly from the original mixture that we had. With glitter, it's not as noticeable because obviously glitter is not going to change. It's really just the epoxy itself that kind of has a milky hue to it. If you are using colors like inks or really vibrant colors, just keep that in mind when you're using Nice and Thick because it will change the color slightly. So now that we have mixed up all of our epoxy, you guys can see that I like mine very, very thick. I either want it barely moving or not moving at all. So I am just going to do some fun little drizzles of gold across my unicorn topper. The little girl that I am making this for is obsessed with hot pink and golden, as she likes to call it. So I definitely wanted to make sure that I had lots of hot pink and lots of gold on there for her. So I am just slowly kind of making these little drips across there. And then I will be ready to apply it to the actual cup. And I probably do mix a little bit more than most people do when they're doing drips, but I like my drips pretty thick, so I rarely have like any left over when I get finished with my drips. So I basically just start out by making a thin ring of whatever my drip color is along the top of the tumbler. So I just go all the way around and just kind of smooth it out a little bit. And then I will basically take a small bead of epoxy and just add it to where the natural drips are starting to form already. And I kind of help start the dripping process, if you will. I kind of just poke them down a little bit with my popsicle stick. And I just do this basically all the way around the tumbler. And once you get your drips how you want, you are just going to set this aside, let it cure, and then we will come back and add our vinyl. So now our drips are cured. I waited overnight, and now we're going to add some gold leaf and her name and a little quote. So I have this little unicorn image, and I'm actually going to weed the interior of the unicorn. So we are basically going to make a gold leaf silhouette out of this remaining vinyl. So I'm basically just positioning this unicorn how I want it on my tumbler. And press it down pretty well. I did go get some scissors and cut off the bottom part because I didn't want such a straight line. I kind of wanted a gradient effect with a gold leaf at the bottom of his body. And I'm just taking my glue stick and making sure I get all of him covered. And then I will just place the gold leaf where the glue was applied. And this can get sticky. I am just basically kind of tapping it down with my fingers. And towards the bottom of his body, I am just taking little tiny pieces of the gold leaf and kind of just tapping it along the bottom. And it helps kind of give that gradient effect. I know it's kind of hard to see in the video, but... So while that is drying, we are going to apply her name on the opposite side of the tumbler. And I just match it up as best that I can. This is why I love lines on my transfer tape, because it really helps me line everything up and keep everything straight. And when I'm applying a name, I typically start in the middle and press down, and then I press down one side and then press down the opposite side. So now that the glue stick has dried a little bit, I'm going to go ahead and peel off this vinyl. And yes, I just use permanent vinyl. That's the only vinyl that I have, so sometimes it's a little hard to remove it if it's been sitting on a cup for a little while. But we're just going to peel him up. I do it just very slowly. And make sure you get all the vinyl off. There were a few pieces that kind of ripped when I was peeling off the vinyl. So I did have to go back and kind of peel up some little straggly pieces of vinyl. And once you get all the vinyl up, and once the glue stick has completely dried, because it can take a while sometimes, especially if they're like larger chunks, then I will spray seal it really well. And then I'm going to apply my quote under the unicorn. So our unicorn has been spray sealed with Rust-Oleum 2 times. And now we're going to apply our quote. You definitely want to seal the gold leaf before you try to apply vinyl over it, because the vinyl will not stick directly to the gold leaf and you could peel it off with the transfer tape when you go to apply it. So sealing it is definitely something that I would suggest. So I am again just matching up my offset to my vinyl words. And I am just going to apply this. I kind of applied it at an angle. It's just a cute quote that says, "Believe in magic," because unicorns are magical. And I just press it down really well with my transfer tape. The eyes in this text were super tiny and I did not feel like weeding them, so I just got my gold marker and just added the dots to it that way. I like to keep small markers on hand like that for this reason. So now we're going to apply the magnets to our lid, and this is how I make my scoops removable. And I make my scoops removable because I just think that it is better for cleaning, because if you make your scoops directly onto the lid, there could be liquid that gets trapped up underneath there and mold could start to grow. This way, when you can remove the scoops from the lid, you can clean the scoops and you can clean the actual lid properly if you want to. So I will just take my marker or anything I have just to make a dot where I want the hole to go. And I will take my drill. I believe my drill bit is 5/8. And I will drill as straight as I can, not at an angle. If you drill your hole at an angle, then your straw is not going to fit down in properly and it will angle funny, and it's just better if you do it as straight as you can. So now we have our hole. It's a perfectly smooth hole, which I really like, and I am going to dump my shavings into the trash can really quick. So now I'm going to place my lid on my tumbler and kind of see where it's going to sit. So I did buy some larger magnets the last time that I purchased from Amazon because I felt like they needed a little bit more height to them. So these particular magnets are 10 by 5 millimeter circles that I got on Amazon. And I ended up using one 10 by 5 magnet and one 10 by 3 magnet. That seemed to give the height that I wanted, but in this video you will see me, I believe, just using the 10 by 5. I did go back and change it later. And you guys can see they are super strong magnets. Sometimes I have a hard time kind of separating them. And I do typically use liquid fusion, but I did end up changing it for this video as well. You will see me apply it with liquid fusion, but I actually decided to apply it with epoxy. So just picture the liquid fusion being epoxy for this video. So what I did is basically put liquid fusion or epoxy onto the tumbler, and then I applied just these two magnets. And once this glue or epoxy dries, then we will go back and add our second magnets, or the magnets that are going to be attached to the scoops. So now that these have dried, if you're using epoxy, you can use fast set and wait a couple hours, which I really like. So we're going to apply the next two magnets directly on top of the first two. So now we have two stacked magnets. And then I am going to place a drop of glue or epoxy on top of the second magnets. And then what I will do is take my straw, place it into the straw hole and into the tumbler. This way everything matches up really well. And then I will just set my scoops down onto the magnets. And then you will let it dry. So if you're using fast set, you can wait a couple hours. And then when you remove the scoops, you will have two magnets attached to the scoops and two magnets attached to the lid of the tumbler. And the final step is basically just to epoxy the tumbler one more time. I did end up going back and adding some gold leaf to this tumbler, which I really liked, but that is pretty much it. I really hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I cannot wait to see what kind of scoop cups you guys come up with. If you guys enjoyed this video or learned something new, please be sure to like, subscribe, and share. Also, don't forget to catch the next video coming up that was picked just for you. As always, if you're looking for more tips, tricks, or tutorials, be sure to check out my tutorial group, which is linked in the description. Thanks for watching.